Behind the stoic faces and rigid protocol of the royal guards lies something the cameras rarely capture: moments of pure humanity that will restore your faith in human connection. These decorated soldiers, trained never to break character, have shared heartwarming exchanges with the royal family that reveal the extraordinary bonds formed through years of loyal service. What you're about to witness goes beyond duty and ceremony to show the genuine relationships that exist behind palace walls. Hit that subscribe button because these touching moments will leave you with a whole new appreciation for the people who dedicate their lives to protecting the crown. The summer sun blazed mercilessly over the grounds of Buckingham Palace as the annual trooping, the colour ceremony, reached its peak intensity. Standing at rigid attention in the sweltering heat, wearing full ceremonial dress, including the iconic bearskin hat, Guardsman David Thompson felt the familiar signs of heat exhaustion beginning to cloud his vision. The thick woolen uniform, designed for the cooler English climate of centuries past, had become a furnace in the unseasonable July heatwave that had gripped London for 3 consecutive days. Thompson, a 24-year-old from Manchester who had served 2 tours in the Middle East before joining the Queen's Guard, prided himself on his unwavering discipline. His military record was spotless, his dedication to protocol absolute. But as the ceremony stretched into its second hour under the brutal sun, even his iron will began to falter. The world started to shimmer at the edges of his vision, and he could feel his knees beginning to buckle almost imperceptibly. From her position on the palace balcony, 8-year-old Princess Charlotte noticed something that the thousands of spectators and television cameras had missed. With the keen observation that children often possess, she watched as the guard's normally perfect posture began to waver slightly. Her young eyes, trained from birth to notice the details of royal ceremony, detected the subtle signs of distress that others overlooked. The princess had always been fascinated by the guards who protected her family. Unlike many children who might find their stillness intimidating, Charlotte saw them as silent guardians, real-life knights who stood watch over her world. She had often wondered what thoughts occupied their minds during the long hours of ceremony, whether they grew tired or hungry, whether they ever smiled beneath their stoic expressions. Without drawing attention to herself, Princess Charlotte tugged gently on the sleeve of her protection officer, Detective Inspector Sarah Chen, a 20-year veteran of royal security who had developed a special fondness for the young princess's compassionate nature. Charlotte whispered something that caused Chen to look more closely at the guard in question, her trained eye immediately recognizing the signs of heat-related distress that could quickly become dangerous. Chen faced a delicate situation. Protocol dictated that guards were not to be approached during ceremony unless there was an immediate security threat. But the princess's concern was genuine, and Chen's experience told her that intervention was necessary. She made a quiet decision that would create one of the most touching moments in recent royal history. Moving with the discretion that marked all royal staff, Chen approached the palace's head of security and quickly explained the situation. Within moments, a bottle of cool water and a damp cloth were procured from the palace kitchen. The question remained how to provide assistance without disrupting the ceremony or embarrassing the guard. Who would undoubtedly prefer to collapse than break protocol? Princess Charlotte, however, had already formulated her own plan. With the natural authority that came from her royal upbringing, she approached her grandmother, the late Queen Elizabeth, who was observing the ceremony with her characteristic attention to detail. The princess whispered her concern, pointing discreetly toward the struggling guard. The Queen, whose 7 decades of public service had taught her to recognize genuine distress, immediately understood the gravity of the situation. With a subtle gesture that only those trained in royal protocol would notice, she signaled to the master of the household that an intervention was required. The wheels of palace efficiency began to turn with remarkable speed. What happened next would be remembered by all who witnessed it as a perfect example of royal compassion in action. Princess Charlotte, accompanied by Detective Inspector Chen and carrying a silver tray with the bottle of water and cooling cloth, made her way toward the formation of guards. The crowd, sensing something unusual was occurring, began to murmur with curiosity as the princess approached Guardsman Thompson, who was now visibly struggling to remain upright. She did something that broke every rule of royal protocol, but demonstrated the very heart of what the monarchy represented. She stepped directly in front of the guard and offered him the water with a gentle smile that seemed to say, "It's okay to be human." For Thompson, the moment represented an impossible choice between his training and his physical limitations. The princess stood before him, offering relief from his suffering, but accepting would mean breaking the very protocol he had sworn to uphold. Yet as he looked down at her earnest face, filled with genuine concern for his well-being, something deeper than training took over, with movements so slight they were barely perceptible. Thompson accepted the water bottle and took several grateful sips. The cool liquid was like salvation, immediately clearing his vision and steadying his trembling legs. As he handed the bottle back to the princess, something extraordinary happened that would be captured by photographers and remembered for generations. Thompson's rigid military expression softened into a genuine smile of gratitude, and he whispered words that protocol forbade, but humanity demanded, "Thank you, Your Royal Highness. Your kindness means more than you'll ever know." The princess beamed back at him, her mission of mercy accomplished, and curtsied with the grace of someone born to royal service before returning to her position on the balcony. The crowd, many of whom had witnessed this exchange through telephoto lenses and had heard whispered accounts from those closer to the action, erupted in spontaneous applause. The moment had transcended mere ceremony to become something far more powerful, a demonstration of the human connections that exist between those who serve and those they protect. 3 months later, during the changing of the guard ceremony that had become one of London's most popular tourist attractions, another moment of unscripted humanity would unfold that would capture hearts around the world.
6-year-old Prince George, attending his first official ceremony without his parents,
clutched his prized possession, a small toy soldier that had been given to him by his great-grandfather, Prince Philip, just weeks before the Duke's passing. The toy soldier, painted in the same colors as the Queen's Guard and standing no more than 3 inches tall, had become George's constant companion. He carried it to official functions as a sort of talisman, a connection to the grandfather he had adored and lost. The small figure represented something larger than play. It was a bridge between the formal world of royal duty and the innocent imagination of childhood. As the ceremony commenced with its usual precision, Prince George watched with wide-eyed fascination as the guards performed their intricate maneuvers. The synchronization of their movements, the crisp commands echoing across the courtyard, the gleaming buttons and pristine uniforms, all of it filled him with the same wonder that had captivated children for generations. But as young children often do during long, formal occasions, George began to fidget. The toy soldier, slippery in his small, nervous hands, suddenly slipped from his grasp and rolled across the smooth stone courtyard, coming to rest near the polished boots of Guardsman Michael Roberts, a 32-year-old father of 2 who had been serving with the Queen's Guard for 8 years. The prince's face immediately crumpled with distress that only a child can feel when separated from a beloved possession. The toy soldier lay just inches from Roberts's feet, clearly visible to the guard but seemingly impossible to retrieve without breaking the sacred protocol that governed every moment of the ceremony. Roberts, whose own children were just slightly younger than Prince George, recognized the universal expression of childhood heartbreak on the young prince's face. In that instant, the decorated soldier faced the same type of impossible choice that had confronted Thompson months earlier: maintain protocol or respond to genuine human need. The guard's military training told him to remain motionless, eyes fixed straight ahead, completely ignoring the small drama unfolding at his feet. But his instincts as a father and his understanding of a child's attachment to special objects created an internal conflict that demanded resolution. With movements so subtle they would have been invisible to anyone not watching closely, Roberts began to shift his weight almost imperceptibly. During the next commanded movement of the formation, he allowed his foot to make contact with the tiny soldier, gently guiding it back toward the area where Prince George stood with his protection detail. The young prince, who had been watching this careful maneuvering with growing hope, broke into a smile that could have powered the palace's lighting system. As he retrieved his treasured toy, he looked up at Roberts with an expression of pure gratitude that transcended the formal boundaries of royal protocol. But Roberts wasn't finished with his small act of kindness. As the formation prepared for its next sequence of movements, the guard allowed his gaze to drop just long enough to make eye contact with Prince George. In a gesture so brief it could have been imagination, Roberts gave the young prince the slightest wink, a moment of connection that acknowledged their shared humanity beneath the pageantry and protocol. Prince George's delighted giggle, quickly suppressed by his ever-vigilant protection officers, rippled through the small group of royal family members who had witnessed the exchange. The Queen herself, observing from her position of honor, was seen to smile with what courtiers would later describe as maternal pride. Not just for her great-grandson, but for the guard who had shown such thoughtful compassion. The incident, captured by several photographers and amateur videographers in the crowd, would later become one of the most shared moments in royal social media history. But more than its viral fame, the moment represented something profound about the relationships that exist within the royal household. Connections that go beyond duty and ceremony to encompass genuine human care and concern. For Roberts, the decision to help the young prince retrieve his toy had felt natural, even inevitable. Later, when asked by fellow guards about the incident, he would simply say, "He's a little boy who lost something precious to him. What else could I do?" This simple statement would encapsulate the philosophy that guided many of the guards in their daily service, that protecting the royal family meant more than just physical security. It meant protecting their humanity as well. The relationship between the royal guards and the family they protect reached perhaps its most poignant expression during what palace staff would remember as the longest day, a ceremonial marathon that stretched from dawn to well past dusk during the Diamond Jubilee celebrations. The late Queen Elizabeth, then 86 years old, but still possessing the stamina that had defined her 7-decade reign, had insisted on participating in every scheduled event, despite concerns from her medical team and household staff. For the guards assigned to the various ceremonies throughout that historic day, the physical demands were extraordinary. Many had been on duty since before sunrise, standing at attention for hours in full ceremonial dress, their faces masks of professional composure even as exhaustion crept into every muscle and joint. Guardsman James Patterson, a veteran of 15 years of royal service, had drawn the assignment for the final ceremony of the day, a private service of thanksgiving held in the palace's private chapel. At 41, Patterson was one of the senior guards, a man whose reliability and discretion had earned him positions at the most sensitive royal events. As the private service concluded and the royal family began to disperse to their individual quarters, Patterson prepared for the standard post-ceremony protocols. Guards were typically dismissed with minimal fanfare, expected to return to their barracks for debriefing and rest. The routine was so established that any deviation would have been remarkable. But on this evening, something unprecedented occurred. Instead of retiring immediately to her private apartments as protocol suggested, the Queen made an unexpected detour. Moving with the deliberate purpose that characterized all her actions, she approached the small formation of guards who had served throughout the day. Patterson felt his heart rate increase as he realized the Queen was walking directly toward his position. In 15 years of service, he had been acknowledged by various members of the royal family on numerous occasions, but a personal approach from the monarch herself was extraordinarily rare and typically reserved for moments of exceptional significance. "Guardsman Patterson," the Queen said, her voice carrying the authority that came from decades of public speaking, but softened with genuine warmth. "I wanted to personally thank you for your service today. I know it has been a long and demanding day, and your dedication has not gone unnoticed." The formal words were remarkable enough, but what happened next would remain etched in Patterson's memory for the rest of his life. The Queen, demonstrating the personal touch that had endeared her to generations of palace staff, continued, "I understand your daughter recently graduated from university. You must be very proud." Patterson, trained never to break protocol even in the most unusual circumstances, felt tears begin to form in his eyes. The Queen had remembered a casual mention of his daughter's academic achievements from a conversation that had occurred months earlier during a brief security briefing. The fact that the monarch, with her countless responsibilities and engagements, had retained such a personal detail about his family life was overwhelming. "Yes, Your Majesty," Patterson managed to respond, his voice steady despite the emotion threatening to break through his professional composure. "She graduated with honors in engineering." "Thank you for remembering." The Queen smiled with genuine warmth, the expression transforming her formal features into something almost grandmotherly. "Please give her my congratulations," she said. "The country needs more young women in engineering. I'm sure she'll make significant contributions." As the Queen moved on to acknowledge other guards in similar fashion, Patterson realized he was witnessing something extraordinary. Each guard received not just formal thanks, but personal recognition that demonstrated the Queen's remarkable memory for the human details that made each of her protectors more than just uniformed figures. Guardsman David Chen, whose wife had recently given birth to their first child, was congratulated on becoming a father. Guardsman William Foster, who had recently returned from his father's funeral, received condolences and was asked how his mother was managing. Each interaction, lasting no more than a minute or two, revealed the depth of personal attention the Queen paid to those who served her family. The emotional impact on the guards was profound and visible. These were men trained to maintain stoic composure under all circumstances, soldiers who had faced combat situations and high-stress security scenarios without betraying emotion. Yet as they stood in the palace chapel, receiving personal recognition from the woman they had sworn to protect, several were moved to tears. Guardsman Patterson would later describe the moment as a revelation about the true nature of service and loyalty. "I had always thought our job was to protect her," he told his colleagues during an informal gathering weeks later. "But that night, I realized she was protecting us too, our dignity, our families, our sense of worth. She made each of us feel seen and valued as individuals, not just as uniformed guards." The Queen's gesture that evening would become legendary within the ranks of the Palace Guard, a story passed down to new recruits as an example of the mutual respect that defined the relationship between the royal family and those who served them. It demonstrated that true leadership involved not just accepting service, but acknowledging and honoring those who provided it. The fear was immediate and primal, the kind that bypasses rational thought and triggers pure panic. Queen Camilla, participating in her first outdoor garden party as the newly crowned queen consort, had been graciously moving through the assembled guests when a large bee, attracted by the floral arrangements adorning her elegant hat, decided to make an extended visit to the royal headwear. For most people, a bee landing on their hat might provoke mild concern or perhaps amused tolerance. But for Queen Camilla, who had suffered from a severe bee phobia since childhood, a fear so pronounced that palace staff routinely checked outdoor venues for hives before her appearances, the situation represented her worst nightmare made manifest. The transformation in the queen consort's demeanor was immediate and unmistakable. Her usual composed smile froze, her hands began to tremble slightly, and her breathing became rapid and shallow. Those familiar with panic responses would have recognized the signs immediately, but to the assembled guests and media, her distress might have been attributed to any number of causes. Standing at his designated position 12 feet away, Guardsman Thomas Wright observed the queen consort's sudden change with the trained eye of someone who had spent 6 years learning to read the subtle signals of royal distress. At 28, Wright was considered one of the most observant guards in the service, a skill that had been honed during his previous career as a paramedic before joining the military. Wright faced an immediate dilemma that crystallized the eternal tension between protocol and human compassion. Royal guards were strictly forbidden from approaching members of the royal family during public events unless specifically summoned or in response to clear security threats. A bee, regardless of the distress it might cause, hardly qualified as a security emergency in any official sense. But Wright's medical background had taught him to recognize genuine panic when he saw it, and Queen Camilla's reaction suggested she was approaching a full anxiety attack. The bee, seemingly content with its floral perch, showed no inclination to depart, instead appearing to settle in for an extended stay among the carefully arranged flowers of the royal hat. The crowd of garden party guests, initially unaware of the drama unfolding, began to notice the queen consort's obvious discomfort. Whispered conversations started among those closest to the royal party, and several guests began, reaching for their phones to capture what they assumed was merely an amusing moment of royal meets nature interaction. Wright realized that the situation was rapidly approaching a point where the queen consort's dignity might be compromised in front of hundreds of guests and numerous photographers. His paramedic training told him that panic attacks, while not physically dangerous in themselves, could lead to fainting or other responses that would create far more serious problems. Making a decision that violated every rule of royal protocol but honored the deeper principles of service and protection, Wright began moving toward the queen consort with purposeful but non-alarming strides. His movement was calculated to appear routine to casual observers, while positioning him to provide assistance if needed. As he drew closer, Wright could see that Queen Camilla was fighting to maintain her composure. Her royal training warring with her primal fear, her eyes wide with barely controlled panic, met his briefly, and in that moment of connection, Wright saw both her distress and her desperate desire not to create a scene that would overshadow the charitable event. With movements so smooth and natural, they appeared almost choreographed. Wright positioned himself beside the queen consort and, in a voice so low only she could hear, said, "Your Majesty, if you'll permit me, I believe I can resolve this situation discreetly." Queen Camilla's relief was palpable as she gave the slightest nod of consent. Wright, drawing on the steady hands that had served him well in medical emergencies, slowly raised his white-gloved hand toward the royal hat. The bee, perhaps disturbed by the approaching movement or simply having completed its investigation of the floral arrangements, lifted off just as Wright's fingers brushed against the brim. But Wright wasn't taking any chances. With a gentle brushing motion that appeared to casual observers as merely an adjustment of the queen consort's hat decoration, he ensured that the bee continued its flight path away from the royal person. The entire intervention had taken less than 30 seconds and had been executed with such smoothness that most guests remained unaware anything unusual had occurred. The transformation in Queen Camilla's demeanor was immediate and remarkable. Color returned to her cheeks, her breathing steadied, and her characteristic warm smile re-emerged as if by magic. But what happened next would cement the moment as one of the most genuine interactions between royal and god in recent memory. Queen Camilla, freed from her phobic panic, turned to Wright with an expression of such pure gratitude that it transcended all considerations of protocol and propriety. Her laugh, when it came, was not the practiced tinkle of royal politeness, but the genuine sound of relief and appreciation. "Guardsman Wright," she said, having somehow remembered his name from brief introductions weeks earlier, "you are my hero. I cannot thank you enough." The informality of the moment, the queen consort's use of the word hero to describe a simple act of assistance, and her obvious emotional relief created ripples of warmth throughout the assembled guests. Many later commented that witnessing this moment of authentic human connection had been the highlight of their garden party experience. Wright, maintaining his professional bearing despite the unprecedented nature of the interaction, responded with the kind of humble dignity that exemplified the best traditions of royal service. "It was my honor to assist, Your Majesty. We all have our dragons to face, and I'm grateful I could help you face yours today." The phrase "dragons to face" would become part of palace lore, a reminder that even those born to the highest positions in the land remained fundamentally human, subject to fears and vulnerabilities that required the compassion and assistance of others. Queen Camilla's willingness to acknowledge her phobia and Wright's instinctive response to help created a moment that demonstrated the mutual humanity underlying all genuine service relationships.